Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week, Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, and be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. It's great to be with you once again here on the program to share with you new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And today's program is no different. We're going to talk about, well, folks, we're not the NSA or anything, but we're going to talk about your real life. Yes, that's right. We're going to talk about your real life with our very special guest. He is a life coach. He has written this book. It's Getting Authentic, Being Resilient, and Make It Count. And his name is Nathan Andres. And thank you so much for being with us today on the program. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Hey, hello, Richard, and hello, Santa Barbara, Greater Southern California. I'm excited to be speaking to this part of the world. Thanks for having me.
Well, this is wonderful. And of course, one of the aspects of our conversing with our very special guests here on the program is that, we talk about, giving people choices and knowledge of those choices to help make their dreams come true. And sometimes people haven't heard the choices that you might offer to become authentic. You've written this book, Your Real Life. Real. What do you mean by real? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that introduction. I do a lot of life coaching, but a big part of my practice is really about resilience coaching and what I call authentic resilience coaching. And it's really about tapping into who you are as an authentic individual and using resilience as the superpower to be unstoppable in the world. The real model, which is where the title of the book comes. So your real life is really based on the model I created to help people understand what I mean by authentic resilience. And when we look at authentically resilient people, they do 4 really clear things every time. And that's what makes up this model. So being real really starts with the R. That R stands for reality. And resilient people are able to really lean into accepting what I call the reality curve. And we can talk about that later.
Mm-hmm.
But the second part of the model is about energy and how you manage energy. And energy management is a big part of what resilient people do. And we definitely are going to talk about that later because that shows up in all kinds of really interesting ways. The A in the model is for authenticity. And what I mean by that is really looking at purpose, your life purpose, and understanding yourself from the outside in and the inside out, and vice versa, from the inside out and the outside in. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But last but not certainly least, the L in the model stands for love. And I know it sounds cheesy when we talk about, love is the thing that makes the world go round. But in truth, love is a big part of resilience and authentic resilience. And I'm happy to kind of expand on that when we get there. But keeping your real life real and getting real with yourself is really about those four key anchors.
Mm. How did you come up with this model, if you will?
People ask me that all the time, Richard, and the story is kind of funny in some aspects. I was working in the pandemic, and I was doing an interview with an old teacher friend of mine, and we are just reminiscing about parts of my life, and then we were looking at how the pandemic has kind of created this buzzword resilience, and everyone was talking about their resilience and companies who were being resilient. And when we were really talking, she said to me, gosh, Nathan, you've done so many interesting things and you've lived through a lot of really wild times. The pandemic is only kind of the latest in a long list for you. And she recalled that I had lived through 9/11 and lived through the Great Blackout and had been through a couple of hurricanes and definitely some typhoons in Hong Kong and Southeast Asia. And my family sometimes calls me the king of disasters, and she said, the pandemic, that's nothing, and you're a marathon runner and you've done all these things. What do you think is this kind of thing that makes you so resilient, Nate? And I said, I'm not sure, because the pandemic was not a difficult event for me. And so it put me on this quest of searching. And inside that quest of kind of searching for what the formula might be, I started to evolve some of my experiences over the last 15 years or so, probably longer than that, probably most of my life, and saying, well, as an LGBTQ person, I've been through some hard things and bullying as a child. Like, what is it? And as I started to uncover it, I've you know, researched and read a lot and kind of found that resilient people do these four things. They face the reality curve, they ride it very successfully. They know how to manage energy. As I said, they know what they're doing with their life. They're true to who they are, and they're leading their lives with love. God, those are the things. And as I was talking about it with my best friend, his name is Steve. I said, I feel like it's just kind of like this is how it is. People are just getting kind of real. And he said to me, well, Nate, you've been telling me to keep it real our whole friendship. So I realized then actually I had the components of the model, and by coincidence also had luckily the four key letters that made a lot of sense and spoke to me. So that's kind of how it came up. And then I validated that with a lot of research, a lot of neuroscience, a lot of psychology, tested it in my coaching practice, and really then asked psychologist friends and some of my clients and some of the people that I'm very close with to pressure test it. And time again, it delivers. And it delivers for my clients. It delivers in some of the workplaces that I've been. And it certainly has delivered for me personally.
So you've actually put this real formula to the test for yourself.
For sure. I use it every day, Richard. I mean, we're about to go in. I know we were talking in the green room a little bit about the election, that's next week. And I thought, oh God, we're all going to be tested in a real way next week. And yeah, I use this model pretty much every day for myself. Different days are, different components, but absolutely. It's
Mm.
definitely tried and tested on myself.
So when you work with different people, when you work with the various individuals that are in your practice, is where I want to go. I'm a firm believer that, people are drawn to you because of the work that you do in this case, right? So you probably don't get a whole lot of pushback in that regard, do you? It's pretty, people are pretty much open to, all right, Nathan, I'm ready, put me on the rack or, waterboard me. I don't care. I just I want to get real. I want to be authentic. I'm tired of wearing, I learned this in one of the personal growth programs I went through. I want to take off all the masks because they're not
Mm,
serving me anymore.
yeah. Yeah. I talk about this with a lot of my clients. Often my clients approach me with one thing that might be happening. Maybe it's something related to work, maybe it's something related to a challenge. And what often comes out of the initial conversations is then exploring some of this internal identity and authenticity work in order to then use authenticity and that authentic resilience to kind of be unstoppable in some of the other spaces. So the root starting point is often different for people, but it is absolutely about looking at the layers of that armor, as you referred to it.
Hmm.
And we have, a lot of armor that we live with, our lived experiences. When we really start to dive deep into authenticity and what that means, the way I define it in my book is really knowing yourself and understanding the things about yourself, but also being yourself, really
Hmm.
understanding who you are in terms of your values and your beliefs and your core principles and your philosophies and the way you see the world and using your lived experiences. And as I mentioned earlier, understanding all the things that are inside you and getting really clear on those kinds of things and then taking that out into the world. And often it's when we take it out to the world, the first couple of times in our lives, that we start to put up the armor because we're being battled with, who we want to be in the world.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of barriers and environmental factors that kind of force people to retreat back into the inside. Um, and so authenticity for me is first and foremost about knowing yourself and taking the inside out and then experiencing the world, using what you experience in the world to bring that back inside, so the outside in, so that you can let go and release the stuff that isn't serving you. Because when you do that, you're able to then kind of hit the third core tenet here of what I call authenticity, which is to love yourself.
Mm.
There's a great phrase out there, Richard. So many people are using it today, and it makes me a little agitated. They say, "Oh,
Mhm.
just fake it till you make it."
Yeah.
Have you heard that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Fake it till you make it. Oh, the fake it till you make it folks always make me giggle a little bit because you can't. You can't fake it
Mm.
till you make it because your body knows the difference and your brain knows the difference. The way the hemispheres of your brain operate and your hippocampus and all of the memory that's stored there in your body, the somatic experiences, you can't fake it till you make it because your body and your brain know better. And so what I always encourage my clients and people who are listening, is let's do the work together.
Mm.
Let's get inside and really, instead of trying to fake your brain and your body, get to know your brain and your body so that you get really internal understanding of everything that's inside so that when you go out to the world, you know exactly who you are. And I think it's those three things. It's knowing yourself, releasing the things that don't serve you, and then truly enabling yourself to love yourself in those ways.
Now, I believe it's Shakespeare. Did he not say something to the effect, know thyself to be true, something along those lines? I don't know if it was Shakespeare or not, but I've heard it somewhere. I've got to find the quote and make sure I get it correct
Yeah, it is
because
Shakespeare, and I think he said it's to thine own self be true.
to thine own self be
Uh,
true. Okay, thank
yeah,
you.
something
Clarification.
of
Yeah,
that nature. Yes,
clarification. But
yes.
um, it also says in the New Testament that and I had it, and now it's skipped my mind all of a sudden. In terms, oh, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Well, let's keep that on a personal level. The hardest thing for people sometimes to do, Nathan, is to go within and have to deal with their own truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, everyone has good, bad, and ugly. I mean, and what part of that armor that you're talking about earlier is, is when we dwell on the ugly. And that's what I mean specifically when we're talking about releasing yourself.
Hmm.
We get bogged down in a lot of ways from our inner critic. Our inner critic is that little voice on the shoulder. Some people call them gremlins, some people call them negative voices, the ugly person that, the devil on your shoulder. I think sometimes we hear that inner critic bogging us down with actually a lot of uh, things that are not true.
Hmm.
And what's important is when we are really trying to uncover these things and really release ourselves, because we listen to the inner critic more often than we should. That breeds things like imposter syndrome, and it breeds self-doubt, and it breeds other kind of elements like process addiction and avoidance, and really kind of doing damage to ourselves, harming ourselves in ways that then make it really hard for us to kind of unlock who we are on the inside. So releasing yourself is really about kind of getting underneath some of those things,
Mm.
and knowing the difference of what is coming from a negative place, in a wrong place, an untrue place for ourselves, and listening then to the things that are true. And that's what I'm saying. You have to understand a little bit about who you are, which is very different than some of the other psychologists out there, and some other writers and authors who say, knowing about yourself is one thing, but really understanding who you are is something of another matter. So I always encourage people to kind of do some of this inside out, outside in work to test and litmus test yourself, so that when your inner critic does start to pipe up, you know better.
Mm.
Easier said than done.
Very much so. Very much so. Nathan Andres is my guest. Your Real Life is what we're talking about. That's also the title of his book. And we are Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we're talking with Nathan Andres and his book, Your Real Life. Get authentic, be resilient, and make it count. I want to ask you about a website we want to send people to so that they can get more information. I'm sure that your book is available at Amazon, but maybe they want to connect with you and say, hey, I liked what you said, and you kind of resonate with me in that regard, and help. I need help. I want to be real.
Yeah, I love that. I'm certainly always available at nathanandres.com. And I have a small blog there. I need to put some more content there. But, a lot of people find me on LinkedIn. And I love that medium because it's a professional landing spot. So if you're looking for me in LinkedIn, you can find me at NY Andres. I have a lot of content that I'm posting there and publishing. Um, Around concepts from my book, other concepts about mental health in the workplace. That's another true big thing for me that I'm very interested in. I'm also, posting about LGBTQ issues and mental health for our community there. And also as a feminist, we need more men is supporting um, women in a lot of places in the world, but also right here in the workplace too. So I speak a lot about menopause and other elements that are important to women in the workplace. So these are the things that I'm talking about and posting a lot about LinkedIn and on my
Hmm.
website. But just learning Instagram. If you want to follow me there too, you can follow me there. But uh, check me out on the website as first stop.
Yeah. Well, I went through some personal growth programs in the early '80s. I went through LifeSpring, an
Mm,
outgrowth of Est, and went through their 3 levels. It was fascinating, the experience as well as what I learned about self, and then some other programs in Phoenix, Arizona, called Omega and Delta Vector, started by a gentleman by the name of George Adair, and he was a printer. He was just a printer with a company. I don't think it's in business anymore called Papago Printing. Fascinating gentleman. I mean, I loved sitting and listening to him, both in the workshops that I went through, as well as the he had these Monday night meetings at local hotel where they used the conference room, and it was I called it like a booster shot. If you
Mm,
hadn't been through one of the programs in a while, you went there and he'd had handouts and so forth. I have notebooks full of the handouts, and it was so fascinating uh, how he would weave things together to help us as individuals to understand how important it was for us to realize that, as I was told many times going through the challenge I went through, you need to take care of you first. I mean, that's the first rule in survival. Take care of
hmm.
number one, because if you want to help the others and you're not taking care of you, how you're not going to be real effective.
Isn't
Is
that
that a
interesting?
perspective that you take as well when you talk with people,
Yeah,
when you're working with them?
I do. And I think several years ago, I stumbled onto this, and it was from a fellow psychologist out there in the world. Please beg my pardon if you're out there listening. I've forgotten how to attribute this, but there is a big difference between being selfish and selfish, right?
Mm,
And it's kind of like being brownish or greenish or, you know, uh, what are the other words, that you could say is ish? Ish is like being most familiar with the self and understanding and being in the business of who you are. There's no one else better than you to understand all the things that make you you and make you tick. And so being in that ish, of being, funny-ish, or selfish in this
mhm.
case, the best person to know about that is you. And that's really different than being, putting yourself at the center of all things all the time. And I think when we are thinking about being selfish, it is about loving ourselves. And
Yeah.
and what I mean specifically about that is what I call the trifecta of self-love.
Hmm.
So when you are putting yourself first, if you think of these three kind of components, then you're actually being more of the selfish than being selfish. And what I mean specifically in that trifecta is self-compassion.
Mm,
That's first and foremost.
yeah.
The second part of that is, we beat ourselves up all the time, right? We are cruel to ourselves because of this negativity bias that we live with as a species. And then things like self-sabotage and imposter syndrome, our inner critic, negative self-talk, these things drive, ourselves to be so hard on ourselves. So self-compassion is the first part of this trifecta. The second part of this self-love trifecta is self-care. When you
Mm,
really love yourself, you are taking care of yourself
yeah.
in the ways that are really important: hydration, sleep, food and nutrition, exercise, and putting those things for love and loving relationships and connection, and gratitude, putting those parts into the self-care bucket. Self-care people get a little mixed up on too, right? Because they think, well, self-care is like, I'm going to take a vacation. Well, that might be a launching part. I'm going over to the Maldives or
Yeah.
Honolulu or what, I'm going to take some self-care time to really check out. And for a week, I'm going to get massages and take care of my body and eat right and play tennis and do those things. But self-care is really a practice. It is a habit. It's disciplined approach to really taking care of yourself. And when you do it in that way, that's the second pillar of this trifecta. Last but not least, in this trifecta of self-love and really loving yourself in a selfish way is what I call self-advocacy. We often
Mm,
put ourselves last, right? And we forget to raise our hand to advocate for ourselves first. And this happens a lot in workplaces. Um, and it's about saying, hey, boss, I don't feel great today. I'm taking a
mm,
mental health day. Or,
mm,
hey, I need to take care of these other things. And it's because I'm not feeling at 100%. Or I need to, excuse myself from this meeting in this moment because I'm experiencing something that is, prompting me to have anxiety, right? It's being bold and courageous to advocate for yourself in those moments.
Yeah.
When we do that, that is actually of care for ourselves in this selfish way without being completely the center of attention, because there's a care and
Mhm.
there's an overall guiding principle for ourselves to really take care and love ourselves in this way. And that's why, love is, there's a theme in my book and in my writings about loving yourself, loving others, looking at forgiveness, looking at how you build community, with love, and do these other things so that you can, create a beautiful life of well-being for yourself. And that's fundamentally, if you start with this trifecta, I'm going to say it again, Richard, self-compassion, self-care, self-advocacy, those three things in combination are really what I mean by self-love. And if you practice those in a regular way, then getting through hard things, first of all, becomes a little bit easier. And the second more important part is the byproduct, which is joy and well-being.
Oh, joy. Boy,
We need more of
we
that.
we need more of it. We deny ourselves the joy that is inherent in life. I quote these guys all the time. Um, the founding fathers who wrote that we have these inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I
Yeah.
wish they'd thrown in there joy as well, but I suppose joy can be part of happiness too. And I've asked this question of some of my guests. I says, do you think they knew something? Do you think they actually were aware, but they couldn't really talk about it because they were dealing with politics and they were dealing with government and they were dealing with other people? That maybe deep down inside they had an understanding that as human beings, regardless of what they were doing at the time, trying to form a new country, uh, they had an understanding that, happiness needs to be a fundamental part. And maybe we could include joy in one's life. And someone did say to me, they said, well, you have to consider how they were living back then. I said, okay, I can appreciate that. But I'd also heard too, this actually blew me away when I heard this. They didn't think that this document they were creating, this government, this country they were creating, was going to last more than 15, 20 years. They didn't,
Wow.
I mean, they created it, obviously, but supposedly they didn't think that it was going to go very far. And here we are, 230 or whatever, however many years later. And we're going. I'm not sure how well we're doing, but that's when it comes back down to the people, you and me. Uh,
Mm.
a buddy of mine had a bumper sticker on his a Blazer, his car, his truck, and it said, um, "My country I love. It's the government I don't trust." That kind of thing. And it's the people. When stuff happens, hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, pandemics, you can list whatever disaster you want. The people come out of the woodwork. It doesn't matter whether you're blue or red or high end economic or poverty or middle class or Catholic or Protestant or Muslim or Hindu or any other division. Everybody gets affected the same by those natural disasters and sometimes man caused, but needless to say. And they say, hey, do you need help? They don't ask for your union card or anything else. Um, and what I want to dive into is this aspect of personal responsibility versus victimhood, because it's reared
Mm.
its head again over the last 9 years in particular. It's not that it ever went away. Don't get me wrong. I'm not naive, but it just seemed like when it reared its head in 2015, I'm going, wait a minute. I played this game back in the 80s. That's why one of the reasons I went through LifeSpring. I played the game of victimhood and I won, meaning I don't play the game anymore. I'm responsible. Uh, do the people that come to you, who are drawn to you, as I mentioned earlier, do they show remnants still of that? That, well, my wife did this to me, or my brother did that to me, or my coworker did this to me, and that's why. Um, are you still, do you have to struggle through that sometimes with them saying, wait a minute, hold on, you know, you chose to go to work at that company and so forth, and it doesn't abdicate the other person's actions. Don't get me wrong there. But do you find that, people are starting to realize, oh, I am responsible. It's my life. And doesn't that also open up the door to share with them that they have they have power? They have personal power in their life?
Yeah, what a great question. And there's a lot in there, Richard. We could unpack. Let me say firstly, I think I'm not a historian, but I am equally blown away by some of that sharing of our founders' beliefs that maybe we'd only experiment 15 years, and here we are nearly 250 something years later, still in the experiment, which is a testament to
Hmm.
values, right? And the values that are propositioned at the founding and throughout our history. I'd love to hear a historian come on your show and talk about that. Um, the second part that kind of strikes me in that though is the innate level of us as humans at a species level to help each other is part of our survival DNA. This is wired into us
Hmm.
at a microbial level in many ways to help each other, to heal each other, to connect. This connection is part of why we have survived as a species over the millennia that we have had human existence. So I don't think that's going away anytime soon. And what I'm
No.
suggesting
Mm-mm.
is that when we look at drawing on strong values and our innate abilities and instinctual desires to connect and survive um, in today's current landscape and context, it looks a little different.
Hmm.
But when we put those two things together, this is where I think we can um, help others. And this is a big part of what my purpose is to help others learn resilience so that they can help each other and help themselves through adversity. We have a
Mm.
lot of adversity at the moment in the world. A couple wars going on. There's more than 100 other human conflicts going on elsewhere, other than the big ones that everyone's talking about.
Yeah.
Um, we have political unrest in many parts of the world, and there's a lot of infighting. Where my clients come to me, if I put it in context of some of the tools, where people get stuck, and you were talking about, I just feel stuck and I'm playing the victim, is is where we learn. And Martin Seligman, one of the great forefathers of positive psychology in this country, still living, did a fantastic way of explaining the concept and proved it in laboratories of learned helplessness.
Mm.
We learn to be helpless. And when we learn to be helpless, we start to slide down what I call, if you look in my book, and I talk about the reality curve. You hit an adversity, or you're having a big fight, or you can't get through something that you're battling with, internally with yourself or externally with others. When you hit the reality curve and you first, acknowledge that some crap has happened, immediately we start to slide down this kind of slope of suffering, as I call it. Now, resilient people move really quickly through this curve, okay? Resilient people move from acknowledge to accept really fast. But where you're talking about victimhood and
Hmm.
getting stuck, and where a lot of my clients also come from in terms of being stuck, is they're stuck in that slope, that first downward slope of the curve
Hmm.
in learned helplessness. They're frustrated, or they're angry, or they're denying that there's an issue, or they don't know how to unlock themselves and then therefore start to blame themselves or blame others for, this adversity that's happened.
Yeah.
A learned helplessness, ultimately, if it goes untreated and we don't do anything about it, can turn into hopelessness.
Mm.
And hopelessness, particularly in victimhood, leads to more helplessness, and
Yeah.
more helplessness leads to hopelessness. And this is what scientists and psychologists call the spiral of despair. If you hit the spiral of despair and you never can kind of move yourself to accept, you might have acknowledged that some crap has happened, but you've
Hmm.
never accepted it. You stay stuck in this spiral of despair. In fact, I just posted a few days ago something that, you spin out of control. And
Yeah.
the thing I posted
Yeah.
was, just for once, I'd like to spin into control.
There
And
you go.
right? We're often always saying I'm out of control. Things are out of control. Well, you can also spin into control
Hmm.
if you are clear about the things that are happening and bring and build that awareness. And we were talking in the green room about gratitude, and we were talking about combating negativity bias earlier in our self-sabotaging inner critic. When you bring awareness in this way, this is one of the ways to start to spike out of this victimhood and to start to recognize that you might be in a learned helplessness situation for yourself, is when you bring attention in these ways, you get to actually move from acknowledge to accept a lot faster.
Mm.
And when you do, that slope of suffering is shortened
Mm.
and it's faster. And this is what I mean by really then getting to know yourself in these ways, knowing your values. Because when you know what your values are, you really practice them and you see them on the streets and you walk around town or go to the grocery store and you see, generosity, in the grocery store because the
Yeah.
person in front of you is helping to pay, $10 extra for the person who might have been short $10.
Hmm.
You recognize your values in this way.
Yeah.
When you start to turn these things on from the inside out, they become very powerful mechanisms for you to move through that slope of suffering and break free of what you described as a little bit of victimhood, but also as what I would describe learned helplessness. So it's
Yeah.
a very important part of my practice to help people recognize that when you move from acknowledge to accept, and then importantly, move from accepting to what I call advertunity, which is when you're able to
Mm.
see that inside the adversity, there's something lighting up as a shift, or the other side of that darkness, the
Hmm.
opportunity. It's where adversity and opportunity, that portmanteau of where those two things collide,
Hmm.
that is the birthplace of then moving up the curve of learning and growth. And that is where resilience is born, because you're learning something along the way. You're learning how to break out of learned helplessness. That could be
Yeah.
part of it. But you're also breathing life and action into saying, I'm not going to be stuck anymore. I'm not going to listen to my negative self-talk anymore. I'm going to push down some of the self-sabotaging uh, tendencies that I have, because I know these things about myself. And I also see, I'll give a good example. Adversity here is you stepped in dog doo on the way to work. You just ruined your favorite pair of shoes. Okay, so you acknowledge you stepped in dog doo. How long do you want to live and breathe and be huffy and puffy and steaming and denying and be pissed off about, ruining your favorite pair of shoes because you stepped in dog doo? Okay, well, the faster you move to, okay, I've stepped in dog doo. What's the advertunity? Hey, you know what? Now maybe is the time I get a new pair of shoes.
Mm. Hmm.
That's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Look at the other side. This is a growth mindset, and psychologist, um, I'm going to screw up her name, Carol Dessort, says in her book, Mindset, you know, what is the opportunity of growth here? If
Hmm.
you look at that and
Hmm.
suddenly say, all right, my action plan has been, I got to get rid of these dirty, stinky shoes, and I'm going over to, the shoe store over here across the street or wherever it is, I'm going to
Hmm.
solve it.
Yeah.
We apply the same kinds of principles to the bigger things and adversities in our lives. We can actually get what we need, and that enables us to be unstoppable and break that some of that victimhood.
And I've heard that before too, that the adversity is what brings opportunity if we will but open our minds to it. And I think that's a very good lesson for each one of us to learn. Nathan Andres, my guest, the author of Your Real Life. Get authentic, be resilient, and make it count as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is a distinct pleasure to have Nathan Andres with us here to talk about your real life. And it's fascinating when I start looking back, not living there, but just looking back on many of the programs that I went through, many of the books that I have read over the years, and in addition, many of the people that I have interviewed and had conversations such as this over the years, and how they sort of all they do tend for the most part to gel together to support it's almost like to support what we have always known for maybe centuries, it may be decades, who knows, that um, that a community is made up of individuals, and a community is important, and so but so is the individual, or and so is the individual. um, and you are dealing with folks who come to you who want to become resilient. And the one word that actually comes to mind, another R word, is become responsible for their lives. Um, when victimhood reared its head 9 years ago, the first thought that came to my mind was, wait a minute, hold it, stop. The reason why we are where we are is because of what we did, not them, in terms of that conversation. And I find that interesting that a lot of times, we want to point the finger. And of course, the old saying, you point one finger at someone else and you've got three coming back at you.
Hmm.
And I find that a lot of people, after a while, and maybe this was only a small part of why I really needed to find a way out of that trap of victimhood back there in the 80s, was because it was exhausting. And I can only imagine how exhausted a lot of people are after 9 years of talking about them versus us and the victimhood. I mean, and matter of fact, from what I have heard of some reports, the numbers of people who are not buying it anymore because they're exhausted is growing. The people who aren't buying it, they don't, it's like enough already. I got better things to do. I got a life to live. I've got a family that I need to take care of. I got me that I need to take care of, and so on and so forth. That I'm just enough already. I'm done. I can't do this because there's more to life than being a victim. Are you finding people who are others, either in your practice or in day to day, just meeting people who are to that point where they're saying, I can't do it. I'm gonna go live my life. Um, how can I be real, Nathan? That kind of thing,
A big
so
part
that
of it. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go
no,
ahead.
no, 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 please go ahead and go ahead.
What you made me think really clearly about, this notion of burnout.
Hmm.
And I think it's a cousin maybe
Hmm.
of victimhood.
Hmm.
And I know that those sit together because I went through a burnout probably 5, 6 years ago. And in the year that was probably, as I call in my book, and still to this day, probably the worst year of my life, 2019. Um, yeah, that's 5 years ago now.
Hmm.
I had three really important people die. I was living in Hong Kong where we were going through these really massive protests. There's a lot of civil unrest. I was struggling in doing some of the things that I wanted to do in my job. My dog also nearly died.
Hmm.
Uh, I was weighed down with wouldn't call it victimhood. I think that was part of it. I was in a place of believing that all these things were happening to me rather than me being in control of that. And at the end of it, I ended up in the hospital with some kidney problems.
Mm,
And unbeknownst to me, as why, we talk about mental health in the workplace, and we talk about people who are burning out. People who are burning out, and I've said this publicly many times, are usually the last people to know that they're burning out.
yeah.
And so, what really helped me unlock and get back to who I am, or two fundamental things, is after I came out of the hospital and had recovered from, I had some kidney stones and some other kidney problems. I recognized I was really far away from my purpose. Okay, my life's work, my mission. And also, fundamentally, I was in a negative reserve of all my well-being batteries. And what you're talking about in terms of people feeling exhausted out there, and a lot of my clients do too. So if you're tired and you wanted to talk about how you recharge yourself, well, then give me a ring. This is a big part. This comes up in all of my sessions. We have four key batteries of energy, and arguably a fifth: physical energy, mental energy, emotional, and spiritual energy. Those are the four. There's no argument about that. The fifth is a lot of times now more than ever before being discussed as social energy, and I think there's some truth in that. I'm still exploring what social energy actually means, but when we fundamentally look at how we want to manage exhaustion and how we want to show up and how we want to get through the hard stuff of life. And it's not always, trust me, it's not always about the dog do that we were talking about before, stepping in dog do. That's a metaphor for some of the bigger stuff, right?
Hmm.
But it really comes down to how we manage these well-being batteries. And I mentioned that, the other component for me was getting into purpose and understanding purpose work. But let me focus for the point of this question and kind of
Hmm.
our discussion here, Richard, is about energy. Physical energy. I was talking about this when we were talking about self-love. It's the self-care. It's physical energy is the one that's most obvious to everybody because it's what we're doing to keep our bodies, charged up physically. It's what do we eat? What do we drink? What do we sleep? How much do we exercise? How much do we move in a day?
Hmm.
Right. And if you're physically charged up, then you're feeling ready to go. If you're on empty, and think of it like this. Think of it if your cell phone battery,
Mm.
your laptop or your iPad, whatever device you use, it suddenly drops to that red zone and starts to flash. Like, what do you do? Most people like immediately panic because they've got FOMO or they've got some other thing and they go and plug in and charge up because they dare not miss a beat of what's going on in their electronics. If you think about your physical battery in this way, do you charge yourself up regularly? Are you thinking about how you charge yourself up physically on a regular basis in that disciplined way that we were talking about before? A
Mm.
lot of people allow themselves to get into that red zone. Now, let's talk about the other three because the other three are less obvious. Emotional energy is a big part of the drain. And we allow ourselves to sabotage our joy. We were talking about that before. We don't often talk about our own safety, but that can be a drain on our emotional ways of working, our openness or our closeness. The way that we experience our emotions is a big part of how we manage our energy. And by the way, physical and emotional energy are intertwined.
Hmm.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
How you feel emotionally will also directly relate to how you show up physically and
Hmm.
vice versa. The other two batteries are less discussed, and that's mental energy. Mental energy is really how we organize our thoughts and how we use the left hemisphere, right hemisphere with our prefrontal cortex, and how we manage our time, how we manage our day, how we manage and organizationally, spatially put things in order. And so if you come out of the day mentally exhausted, it's because you had to think a lot. Your brain is tired from thinking. It's from
Mm.
the learning that you did that day, whether that is new learning or conditioned learning or otherwise. And we often forget in how should we try to charge up our mental batteries. So victimhood and some of this exhaustion, burnout comes from being overly exhausted because you're not ever thinking about how you charge up your brain power, right? And that's different than your emotional self and your emotional battery. Last but not least is purpose, the spiritual battery. This is going to hopefully ring your bell, Richard, because I know this is where you like to spend time talking about, spiritual energy. Some
Hmm.
people really liken spiritual energy to be part of a more formative organization or church or temple or organized kind of way of worship. I like to think about spiritual energy as the relationship that you have with yourself
Hmm.
and where purpose, your own purpose kind of comes from, and where your values that we're talking about, your beliefs, the core principles of your life, how those create meaning for yourself. And when we aren't talking and charging up that spiritual battery and being in that work for ourselves, that can drain us. I'll tell you, I'm supercharging all four batteries right now because I'm talking about my purpose. My purpose is as a resilience coach is to get out there and change the world one human at a time by enabling authenticity and resilience skills.
Mm.
That's what I'm doing, and I'm every time I get to talk about it, my spiritual battery is supercharging, which then ultimately has a knock-on effect in charging up the other three batteries.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
what you're suggesting earlier is when we don't think about our energy management, because time is finite. We all have the same amount of time. It's just the great mystery of each of our individual existence that we don't know exactly how long we have, but we
Yeah.
have the same amount of time of day. Uh, what the difference is how we manage and input our energy. And so a lot of my clients come to me to say, help me sort this out.
Exactly.
And it's three fundamental things: know your energy, know where you recover it, and know where you want to focus it. And if you do those three key things with these four batteries, and arguably the fifth one,
Yeah.
and you're talking about where your purpose is,
Hmm.
being that authentic inside outside person in the world every day, you're going to have no problem really being unstoppable with the hard stuff that comes in life because you're knowing how to manage uh, staying on the path and putting
Yeah.
the energy in the right place.
I had a general manager. She was my first. I'm still looking for her too, by the way. She was a really neat gal. And I remember her teaching me how to better utilize, personal energy, that kind of thing. And um, we were having a problem at the radio station. And I was starting to get a little flustered, I know. And she came over. She says, "Okay, here's what I want you to do. First of all, I know that you're feeling a little bit like you're having your own pity party. Okay, and that's fine. That's okay. Here's what I want you to
Yep.
do, though. Um, I want you to kind of come back here, and I want you to focus on solving the problem, whatever it was, the adversity. And then when you're done, you can go over in the corner and have your little pity party. That's okay. It's perfectly acceptable." And so I kind of got myself back into the mode and solved the problem. And I thought about what she had said, and I thought, well, but I don't need to go over there and have my little pity party in the corner. So I don't need to waste that energy doing that. And that's why I think too that when we get out of that mentality of victimhood or irresponsibility sometimes, um, because and in other situations too, not just victimhood, but you start worrying about stuff. You're still responsible, but it's like, whether it's your finances or your home life or what have you, and your energy level starts to drop. I mean, I've experienced this just recently, and I'm thinking, what am I doing? You know, because first of all, what I'm worrying about, number one, is temporary. Number two,
Mm.
there is a solution. I've always believed that there's always a workaround. Whether you're dealing with computers, finance, or relationships, there's always a workaround. But more importantly, that it's temporary. It's not going to be here forever. And you will find a solution. So once you get back into your head, your intellect, all right, your processes, you're going to find a solution, or at least you will know which direction to go to find the solution. But if you burn yourself out energetically by being in that worry state, you're going to be exhausted and you're not going to be able to do just that. That's one of the things that has struck me about just living life is that we expend a lot of energy in so many different directions. And one of my favorite things, this is one of my favorite things, of course, having these conversations. But sometimes
Mm.
when I'm doing production, whether it's audio or video production, I will get so into it that the next thing I know, what do you mean it's 2 hours later? What?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but I still feel energized by doing that. It's like what you were referring to before. You're talking about this and sharing the ideas, and boy, your spiritual energy is rising. I want to talk to you a little bit about our our intuition, going within and listening to that still small voice. We promote on this program what is called taking time to go within during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s. And of course, it started with 2020, the year of perfect vision, where you get that perfect vision when you do go within, when you listen to that still small voice, whether it be for guidance, for inspiration, sometimes just for comfort, and sometimes I don't hear my dad's voice. He has passed on a year and a half ago. I don't hear his voice, but I get impressions. And then sometimes I'll speak out loud and go, "Where did that come from?" And usually it's a word of encouragement or sort of self pump up, as it were. And it's my dad. Because I remember the last few things that he said to me before he passed. He says, "I love you, and I'm very proud of you of what you've accomplished in your life," and so on and so forth. And so I get that from him. So let's talk about the importance, if because you talk about recharging that spiritual battery. To me, that would fall under that category of listening,
Mm.
spending that time in that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place.
Yeah. Oh, first of all, Richard, thanks for sharing that personal moment with me and with the listeners. I want to just back up to something that you said a
Sure.
moment before, which is about being in flow.
Hmm.
When you're in the things that you love. Another great Hungarian American psychologist named Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. He recently passed a few years ago. He was the one who kind of came up with this notion of flow, and it's when you get into the state of doing that time passes because so quickly because you're doing the things that feed your soul.
Yeah.
And that's a massive paraphrase for his work. So no offense to him and or Angela Duckworth, who was one of his students, and she's written an amazing book too, which is out there called Grit. When we're in flow, it's in those moments that time does pass us by very quickly because we're doing the things that are charging our batteries at a very spiritual level.
Mm.
And so I appreciate you sharing that because that's the goal is when you create experiences for yourself, doing the things that you're good at, and you're working in your strengths, and you're working in spaces and places that charge you up. Um, Ultimately, those can be some of the foundations or milestones that point you towards purpose.
Mm.
You mentioned this voice, this calm. In my book and in my writing, it's the opposite shoulder, right? It lives opposite to that negative voice of the inner critic
Hmm.
and living in managing negativity bias. That's negativity bias is how we also survived. We're built on these signals in our amygdala and brains. And part of what I'm suggesting in our earlier discussion is about plugging in and being aware of that other voice. The other voice is the inner nurturer. The
Mm.
inner nurturer, sometimes they call the inner coach. There's a variety of names. The angel on your shoulder,
Mm.
that positive reinforcing voice that you hear from time to time that says, "Yeah, that's right. Keep doing that. More of this, please." our brains are wired for pleasure. So that this is where negativity bias and these two things kind of start to cross wires a little bit. But it's about channeling your inner nurturer. When you do that and you start to listen to yourself, and these moments can come from uh, experiences that you create for yourself, either say through meditation or working in flow, as we were talking about, or doing exercise. It's why you have great ideas sometimes when you're in the shower,
Mm-hmm.
because you're combining physical energy with emotional and mental recharge, right? And suddenly you know the energies are working in your favor, and your inner nurturer says to you, hey, here's your $1 million idea. um, it's about tuning into those moments, just like you were saying, tuning into the voice that might be your dad's voice, listening to that.
Mm-hmm.
We are all, and I don't want to go too metaphysical here, but at the universal level, we're all energy, and energy moves. So it's about channeling the energy, the particles, and the movements of the particles, and the way that energy is exchanged. So when we're listening to that and channeling that into the sounds that we recognize as an inner nurturing voice, my advice is always listen.
Mm.
They won't steer you wrong. Your inner critic will be often wrong almost all the time because it's trying to protect you, right?
Yeah,
In a false kind of way. But your inner nurturer is the voice that really believes in you. And
yeah,
when you listen to that and buy into that, and you're on a supercharging moment with the batteries, and and or even when the batteries are down and you hear that inner nurturer cheer for you,
yeah.
that's when you got to say yes. And that's a big part of the challenges that I have with clients is they often want to say yes to everything.
Mm.
And it's learning to say no
Mm-hmm.
that enables them to say yes to the right things.
Yeah. I've often said that the inner voice that I refer to my still small voice as my friend, have for years.
Hmm.
And I often say that that still small voice will never put you in harm's way. It may challenge you. That's different, but it will never put you in harm's way. I had a situation on a financial level. I had a plan. I had a plan. Okay. And I get this impression that I needed to do this other thing. And I'm going, no, that's incomplete. That's contrary to my plan. And the impression kept coming and kept coming. And I'm going, all right, all right, all right, all right, I'll do it. And I did it. And a few days later, I was glad I did, because if I hadn't, things would have been a whole lot worse. And I would have probably dived into the inner critic and the victimhood and all of that stuff. So that's sort of a form of protecting us. That the universe is protecting us in a manner of speaking. Your real life, get authentic, be resilient, and make it count. My guest is Nathan Andres. NathanAndres.com is the website. I will be linked to that. And you are listening to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, and my guest, Nathan Andres. I want to thank you so much for being a part of what we are doing here. Kind of what you're doing too, changing the world, one person at a time. And we hope that those folks who are listening will step up to what we call the smorgasbord table, which is loaded with everything we've put on that table for the last 17 years plus doing this program. And come back to the table after you have partaken of what you've wanted, because I guarantee you're going to learn something. And I thank you for sharing with us and placing your dish on that table.
Well, I'm so grateful to even have been invited to the table and to even show up and then be invited to bring my dish. And I hope that it's helpful for your listening audience and for anyone who might be interested to connect. It's what we do when you want to make a difference in the world, one person at a time. So I'm happy to be here and grateful that we spent the last hour together. Thank you very much.
I have three final questions I ask all of my guests at the end of the program, and they're very short questions, but they are, I hope, profound and inspiring to some degree. The first of those three is, who is Nathan Andres?
Oh, I'm just me. I'm a normal guy from the Midwest who happened to have a very interesting global life and experienced a lot of interesting challenges and adversities and have put it in a book with some science that makes it available to people because I just want to help people in all the ways that I can while I'm here. That's my purpose.
What gets you up in the morning?
It's usually my dogs. Okay. I I would say that. That's a real literal answer, but I would say also knowing that um, I work in HR, human resources, and also doing this work as a resilience coach. I just look forward to whatever life is going to bring me um, each day.
Mm,
And I know that the tools that I've written about that I've been using for most of my life, that they work.
mm.
And I trust the universe and myself to bring joy. And I look for it as much as I possibly can every day. And that's what gets me keeps me going.
And finally, what was your best day?
Oh God, I'm gonna kill time here on the air trying to figure out. I don't, oh, that's so big. I don't, my best day. I got a lot of really best days.
Mm,
There isn't just one. I think I have lived a very privileged life in some ways, but because of the tools and the things that I do for myself, the practices that we've talked about, I have a lot of really best days that
mm.
feel memorable from my life. And that's a whole nother talk show. I'll leave
Well,
it, I'll leave it there for
well,
today.
maybe we'll have you back to have that talk program. Well, thank you again, Nathan. It's been wonderful having you on the program. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. And until our next broadcast, podcast, video cast, love Talal. Jeanette, I'm still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Hey, Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.